in this section, we're going to take a look at severe weather and tornadoes. So from this, you should be able to understand what a supercell is. You should be able to explain the process of how hail forms, understand how tornadoes develop, be able to classify tornadoes, and also be able to explain what to do in the event of a tornado. So starting with supercells, a supercell is a very powerful self-sustaining system where you have a lot of rotation and strong updrafts. These updrafts can actually cause air to rise for 10 to 20 minutes before they reach the top of the cloud. So these often form in cumulonimbus clouds and can usually last for a couple hours with strong updrafts of 150 miles an hour. These supercells can lead to tornado formation. So every year there's about 100,000 storms. Only about 10,000 or so are severe, with even fewer being supercells. So we can get really strong winds sometimes in localized areas when you have rain-cooled downdrafts producing really strong winds. So what happens is, as these winds come down, they hit the ground and they spread out. And with macrobursts, they could be up to 125 miles an hour, and microbursts in really small localized areas can reach 150 miles an hour. So remember, we talked about the formation of hail, and how hail forms when you have water droplets in the clouds that kind of pass back and forth between a freezing layer in our atmosphere. So you have really strong updrafts that hold these ice pellets in the air, and they rise up and they pass into the freezing area and they freeze, and they drop back down into areas where it's still liquid water, and this water essentially coalesces, but this rising and sinking of air because of these updrafts is what's going to build up these hailstones, and then eventually they're going to be too heavy for the updraft to support it, and they're going to fall to the earth. And as you can see in the pictures, they can reach sometimes tennis ball size or even softball size. If we take a look at tornadoes, a tornado is a violent whirling column of air that's in contact with the ground. So the tornadoes will sometimes start as what we call a funnel cloud, which is just the circulation in the atmosphere and the clouds, and then only when it touches down onto the ground is it considered a tornado. So a lot of times these will form in supercells, but they can form from other unique types of clouds as well. The only reason a tornado is visible, because remember a tornado is just moving air, is because of all the debris and water vapor that it picks up as it starts swirling and working its way towards the ground. So here are a couple of pictures of tornadoes, and you can see they vary in shape and size. Some of them can be wide, up to a mile wide even. You can see how over each location that it forms, if it forms over a desert, it's going to be really sandy. If it forms over water, it's going to create a water spout. And sometimes if you have a tornado passing through an area that's on fire, you can actually get a fire tornado. So tornadoes develop when wind speed and direction rapidly change. So with your height above the ground, if you have the winds moving slower along the surface and really fast higher in the atmosphere, it's going to create almost a rolling effect on the ground. And scientists think that what happens is this rolling column of air on the ground will be lifted by strong updrafts, and then that'll cause the column to move vertically. And then what happens is air is removed from the center of it and creates a low pressure system. And then it's going to produce really violent winds. So these tornadoes are usually pretty narrow. They're up to 200 meters wide, which is about 600 feet. They're usually that or smaller, and they only last a few minutes, but sometimes, like I said, they can get up to a couple miles wide. So again, here's a picture showing that process of how if you have slower winds on the ground, faster winds higher up, it's going to create the air to roll along the surface. But then with strong updrafts, that rolling is going to get picked up vertically to the point where it's then going to be spiraling in the air. So the way we classify tornadoes is using the enhanced Fujita scale. So tornadoes, they used to be just on the Fujita scale, and it would be an F1, F2, F3, F4, F5. Well, now they've changed the scale, expanded a little bit, and they have EF0, which is the weakest tornado, and this is where winds are up to 85 miles an hour, all the way up to an EF5, where winds could be 200 miles plus. Most tornadoes, again, are fairly small. They're EF1 and smaller, and only about 2% of them make up to EF4 and EF5 tornadoes, which can completely wipe out an area. So here's the scale. So you can see the rating on the left, wind speeds in the middle, and then on the right you can see the associated damage, both with text and pictures. And we'll take a look at this more in class. So these tornadoes also have very narrow paths of destruction, so you can see clearly where the tornado's path was through this area. Tornadoes can occur anytime, but some areas are more likely to have them form. So a lot of times tornadoes form in the spring and late afternoon and evenings where you have polar and tropical air masses meeting. So when you have those temperature differences being the greatest, this creates prime conditions for a tornado to form. Also, a lot of times you're going to have flat open areas, and this is where you're going to be able to have that wind difference at the surface and having a lot of air moving along the surface. Because remember, if it's really mountainous or really forested, then these winds are going to be broken up by that air resistance. So we have Tornado Alley, and about 1,000 tornadoes touch down every year in this stretch. And Tornado Alley, as you can see, starts up here in Iowa, goes through Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas. It picks up a little bit of Colorado and New Mexico. But what happens is you have your cold and dry air coming down from Canada, your continental polar. And then you have your warm, wet air masses coming up from the Gulf of Mexico, your maritime tropical. And when these air masses meet, because they're bringing such different characteristics, it creates a lot of instability. And then as a result, you can get tornadoes to form through this stretch. So here you can see where the most common tornado activity is throughout the United States. And again, the majority of that activity falls right in here through Tornado Alley. So what do we do in the event of a tornado? Well, first you need to understand what a tornado is going to look like and kind of the signs that it is coming. A lot of times the sky is going to become very dark and you're going to get greenish clouds. Sometimes you might get hail, you might get loud thunder. And a lot of times people report that you're going to get wind that sounds like a freight train. If any of these conditions happen, then start to keep an eye on the sky for tornadoes. If you see a tornado touching down, you want to immediately get to a cellar, basement, anything underground. If you're in a house and there really is no basement, you can get in a bathtub or closet or hallway, anywhere where there's more structure in the house to support you so that if the house comes down, you can still be protected. A lot of times if you're getting in the bathtub, they always say put a mattress or a bunch of blankets over yourself. If you happen to be outside when this happens and there's nowhere to go, what you'd want to do is get to a low-lying area. So you want to try to get as low to the ground as possible or get into a ditch so that any flying debris is less likely to hit you. If you're driving, what you want to do is pull over, and if you can, if there's anywhere nearby, you want to try to get to an overpass and then get underneath the overpasses into the corners to protect yourself. So the National Weather Service will often issue tornado watches and warnings and even send out reverse 911 calls and texts. With a tornado watch, it just means that conditions are favorable. It's possible for a tornado to develop. However, if a warning is issued, that means a tornado is either definitely going to happen or it's even confirmed that it's already happened. So again, from this section, you should now be able to understand what a supercell is. You should explain the process of how hail forms. You should understand how a tornado develops, be able to classify tornadoes, and then also know what to do in the event of a tornado.